You're listening to the Digital Deep Dive, where we tackle the newest trends, strategies, and pain points shaping growth across the digital landscape. From Amazon and D2C to international expansion, join our host and e-commerce leaders across multiple industries for in-depth discussions on how to maximize your brands in the digital arena. Now, here's your host, Aaron Conant.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Digital Deep Dive Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Conant, and today we're going to talk about site speed and security. I have a lot of questions popping up right now as people have tackled Amazon, Walmart. We covered those a lot. When we get into the direct-to-consumer side of things, there's a lot of focus, a lot of emphasis right now on performance as a whole. And what's interesting as we go down that path of site speed as a whole is I have a lot of conversations on that. But I was talking with our friends over at Edgio about this other piece of that comes in, which is around security as a whole, and what's often forgotten about when we're just thinking about performance as a whole. And so they've been great friends, partners, supporters of the network for a while now, come highly recommended from a bunch of brands in it. So I just thought we'd jump on the line with them today and just kind of dive into this balance of site speed and security and what it means and what people have to think about when they're implementing it. And so Ajay here, I'll kind of kick it over to you if you want to do, thanks so much for your time today. Thanks for jumping on here and letting us pick your brain for a while. But, if you want to jump in with an intro around yourself and then Edgio as a whole, that'd be fantastic. And then we can kind of jump into the conversation. Sound good?
Absolutely. Hey, Aaron, thank you. Thanks so much for having me on this. So my name is Ajay Kapur. I'm the general manager of our security and applications business at Edgio. So Edgio is a edge platform and security platform. We currently power 4% of traffic on the internet. So not everyone may have heard of us, but we sit behind so much of what you do online. And the business I run is everything related to security, everything related to website performance, and then an edge development platform that allows you to enable compute and run other sophisticated things at the edge of the network. It's a full developer platform for that type of thing. And, I got into this role via acquisition. So I'm an entrepreneur, started a business called Layer Zero a while back and built that up in the Silicon Valley and sold it to Edgio a little over 2 years ago. So it's been a really exciting ride here. And, coming back to the topic of performance and security and team velocity, I'll say there's just a huge convergence going on, where you can't really talk to a team about performance without also asking the question of, hey, why do we have so much traffic coming from unwanted robots? Why do we have spikes in our traffic at the most critical times when we're, say, trying to release new product and scalpers come in and they take the first bit of inventory, really eating into customers' margins? You can't kind of have those two conversations. And if you do solve those two problems simultaneously, you have to ask yourselves, hey, do you have as a team any bandwidth to do anything else? So are your teams just kind of hobbled by the amount of work it takes to make your experience secure, to make it incredibly fast, without only focusing on that and not focusing on kind of the basic things you do as an e-commerce business to remain competitive from a feature standpoint with your other competitors? So we find CTOs and the heads of these development teams, the ones that actually run these e-commerce experiences, have to solve all three problems: a security problem, a performance problem on their experience, and I'll call it just a team efficiency, team velocity problem. And they kind of have to solve all three. They can't say, well, I only want to handle one and not the other. Go ahead.
Yeah, but no, I see it a lot, though, that people you have the e-com teams that are just driving performance.
Yeah.
Right. And they want the speed at pretty much all costs. And it's not really out of negligence. It's more on the idea of, hey, we didn't know that it also incorporates all these other issues that come along with it. And, over the past few years, growth has just been there. But we're at this time now where it has to be strategic and it has to be more focused. And what are we going to look for and what are we going to pour into? And this performance and site speed piece seems like it's almost easy to tackle, but there's these other things that go along with it that, I can't wait to jump into it as a whole. What are some of those common things that people miss that they need to be aware of when they're thinking about performance, site speed? It is security, but what does that look like as a whole?
Yeah. So there's let's start with the security element. So we had a customer that was showing their analytics recently. When they flipped on our WAF, so our firewall, they through that and through some bot management, we also have a AI-driven bot management tool. About 85% of the traffic, they didn't know this, that was hitting their experience was effectively coming from people they didn't want there. And they happen to be a customer where, for whatever reason, some bad actors out there or others who were trying to scrape their content were specifically targeting them more than than you'd expect. So when you're able to say that, hey, 85% of my traffic is actually just unwanted, put in some simple rules or have the AI kick in and block it, that just makes you so much better able from an infrastructure standpoint to serve your legitimate customers. It also helps you during those critical sales and spikes where you actually will experience load just with your own traffic, let alone adding, a factor of 4 or 5 times that amount of traffic just based on these bad actors. So one is just insulating yourself from this traffic. The second thing is we find that a lot of companies are saying, hey, they need to prevent people from, again, scalping or coming in and getting their inventory ahead of legitimate customers, enabling gift card fraud, scraping content for sort of pricing so that competitors can gain more intelligence about you, or unwanted search engines or other shopping bots can get more intelligence about you that you don't want. Their usual set of bad actors. When you take the sophisticated set of things you need to do to be able to block that type of information, often companies end up sending that information to this big centralized place before it comes back to, call it, your core experience. And so you end up adding a lot of latency. So we had another customer. It was one of the bigger Asian airlines who had a kind of online bookings flow. So very much like an e-commerce flow, but you search for inventory, make a purchase. And they were using a tool for security that would essentially take that approach of, instead of processing everything at the edge. So if they had a Japanese customer, instead of it going straight into the Tokyo POP, it first went to some centralized place like an AWS or wherever they had their kind of big intelligence for fraud running. It would go there before going back to the customer to process all that, what should be blocked and what shouldn't be blocked kind of rule set. They ended up adding about 40% latency to every request to add that intelligence. So if you went to that CTO there and said, hey, well, you got a site speed problem, but you've also got a problem with fraud and ticket scalping, which is more important to you? That's kind of putting that CTO in a very odd and inappropriate choice. You have to be able to say, well, both are required. And so, when you're able to upgrade a platform and have it just be that right in Tokyo in less than 1 millisecond, so less than 1,000th of a second, you can run 6 or 7 layers of, call it, security rules right there and then, and decide whether this is a piece of traffic you want to admit into your systems or not, and then just block right there. You're basically saying, okay, we're doing that level of protection on your experience, but with zero impact to performance. And this is before we even get into all the kind of things that customers and e-commerce business owners and technology owners need to do to actually enhance performance on their experience. So just from the beginning, take all that bad traffic away and do it in a way that doesn't actually slow down your experience. So we thought that's where a lot of this stuff kind of starts. You end up slowing it down because you have all these tools. Security is one of those big areas where those tools definitely slow you down if you don't do it thoughtfully.
And this is just because you're operating at the edge. Is that it? Or
yeah, on the security element of it, absolutely. You're taking and you're running all this sophisticated AI inference and other things as much as possible right there in the line of fire at the edge.
Because I mean, a lot of the conversations I have with brands is they want it, but a lot of times it's just it's like pre-caching content, right? So we're going to guess where they're most likely next to click, pre-cache content, and then when they click it, it's increased site speed.
Yeah.
But how does what you're talking about?
We do that as well.
What's that?
We do that as well. So it all starts with ensuring that all the things you want to be doing, and that are requirements for your experience, like securing your flows, have zero negative impact, i.e. they're running right there and then we're as close to the user as possible. And then, as I was saying before, because you're able to cut out all that traffic, it makes your infrastructure that much more available and less overloaded by the bad traffic. So that actually enhances speed. Then once you've done that, that's kind of the basics. Now, I'd say fewer than half of the kind of larger e-commerce experiences actually do this. They tend to run security in a mix of some things at the edge, and a lot of the sophisticated stuff has to kind of go back to some centralized area, and that tends to slow it down. But I'd call that the basics. Then you have to ask yourself, okay, now we've got the basics solved. We can call ourselves secure. We're not hurting ourselves. In fact, we may be helping ourselves if you're kind of reducing traffic, the bad traffic. Then you ask yourself, okay, what do we do to go from a, above average type speed site to something that just feels almost instantaneous? And that's an area where, me and the team have a tremendous amount of experience, because there is no kind of upper limit. I mean, if you have anything less than it being instantaneous, it's not that free flowing interaction you have when you walk into a store. And so, to kind of paint the picture, and we work with so many interesting and well-known e-commerce brands and retail brands. And imagine you kind of walked into a physical retail outlet, and the first thing you did, instead of actually seeing product everywhere, which is what you do when you walk into an outlet, you see what catches your eye. You have to walk down, a white hallway with a bunch of doors, and you have to read a sign that says, hey, do I care about handbags, or do I care about blouses, or do I care about something else? And then you go open that door, and it takes about 3 or 4 seconds every time you do that sort of thing. And when you do show up, you see a narrow view, maybe just one rack. You're not able to have things in the periphery catch your eye. That would just be a really painful type of retail experience. It's so different than what we experience today, where so much thought is into curating that serendipitous idea of, hey, here's some of the most interesting things. You can see them everywhere. You can interact with something catches your eye, you immediately walk over to it. And, our goal, there's going to be certain things about a digital experience you're never going to be able to recreate. But if you can eliminate page load times, and I really truly use that word eliminate, because I think that is possible today, you can get as close to that as possible. And what we've seen is when you're able to get to those instantaneous levels, so where things are loading in less than the blink of an eye, it virtually feels instantaneous to you. You see that people in a, say, 3-minute shopping session are seeing twice the number of products. And as you probably know, when you're shopping for something, it's that last product that you see that catches your eye that gets you to want to buy, right? It's not necessarily a deal. It's not necessarily something about the way the image was taken, although that all really helps. It's you see something that you weren't going to normally, you gave yourself 3 or 4 minutes. That's kind of the patience we have for these experiences. And we are able to routinely have up to double the number of products shown to people just because things load instantaneously. And when you do that, obviously then increases your conversion rate. That last product is the thing that compels you to add to cart. You go then through the checkout, and then you may add more things over time. But performance, absolutely, we've seen time and time again in a split-tested way, adds to conversion rate, and thus revenue per user. And it's something we can speak to the business pieces of it. If that's more interesting, we can speak to the how do people actually get instantaneous experiences. Happy to kind of go anywhere.
Yeah, I do. I want to go to the how. I want to go to the business side. But it's just interesting, for the past few years, brands have just signed up for everything in their tech stack, right? That fear of missing out, and, everything was so hectic. But we're at this point now where brands are streamlining. They're doing a lot of tech stack rationalization. We are getting to the performance piece. And it's just interesting because this topic a year and a half ago was not coming up that often. Everybody wanted a faster site. But at the same time, they're going for all these other tools that they're that have promised an increase in conversion, retention rate, lifetime customer value, all these different things. But what you're talking about is like, it's been coming up more and more often, this performance piece. And I just think over the next year, this is going to become table stakes. Because like you said, near instantaneous, or you're saying instantaneous, is pretty much achievable at this point in time. And it's going to be a point where there's going to be so many people that are implementing it over the next year that you will immediately realize, as a shopper, as you're out there online and you're clicking from shop, you land on a website that doesn't have it. It's going to feel like, it did for me way back when I'm, dialing up AOL, right? Waiting for it.
Absolutely. It's going to become the new normal. It in some sense, we've allowed ourselves to say, hey, if I'm scrolling through Instagram, or even Amazon.com and their app, like I'm used to a certain just near instantaneous experience there. right? Especially on the social networks. That's where we spend most of our time when we're browsing around, right? Then you show up to the world of well-known brands, top tier brands that aren't Amazon when it comes to shopping, and you almost condition yourselves to saying, hey, there's going to be an element of pain here, something that just nearly isn't as smooth. But as this really catches hold, and I'll talk to a few kind of trends as to why this is, continuing, but especially in the next couple of years, as you allude to, going to become the new normal. But as this becomes the new normal, absolutely that's going to be the case, where it's like, okay, this materially feels old. Like you said, feels like dial-up, and we've entered the world of broadband. So we've already kind of been conditioned to what instantaneous feels like. I mean, I think some of these social networks really have spent so much time on those problems, and plus you're used to accessing it from an app where that developer has so much more control over speed. But all of that can be brought to the web. It can be brought to mobile, mobile browsing, where a lot of e-commerce happens. But what's the kind of the trends behind this? I'd say one of the biggest things is first was that customers got used to it on social networks, where maybe 5 years ago, those companies spent so much time, Facebook and others, on making speed top priority. And they had all the data on ROI to show that it was valuable. They had a different business and advertising, but even there, the more you see, the more engagement there is, the more money they make. The next biggest thing was Google. So Google started to say, hey, if you had competitors like Facebook who are driving everyone into native applications and helping people monetize native applications, and those experiences were better and faster, more engaging than those on the web, and the web is what really Google monetizes. Google said, look, we gotta take advantage of our importance in the ecosystem and make site speed something everyone cares about. So what did they do? First is they announced that they're going to rank people's websites based on speed. There's no better way to force the market to care than to say, hey, you're not gonna get nearly as much free traffic as you used to get, because the game of content had been played out for years. If you sell neckties, you have done all variations of neckties and that are possible as it relates to content to rank equally. So that speed ended up being this big differentiator in terms of, well, you could have a slow site or a fast one with equal content, and it'll be the tiebreaker that'll have you land higher. We sometimes have had customers of ours that may do 10 million or 20 million of necktie revenue. That's a specific example in a dedicated experience. And they may be competing with the folks like a Nordstrom, Macy's, who have such more to invest in SEO, but they'll rank higher. And it wasn't because of content. They started out roughly equal on content because, they invested so many years in that. And just the speed differential was enough to have them, show up, number one or two, where that wasn't the case before that. And so speed ended up being something Google put into their algorithm a few years back. That was a huge thing. The second thing they did is they said, hey, we're going to make the process super transparent. We are going to tell you the metrics we're using. So unlike, content where it's a bit of a black box in many ways and you have to kind of reverse engineer, they said, here's the metrics we're using. Here's how we measure it. Here's how you stand. So you can see exactly where you stand. And so they created something called Core Web Vitals, and then a tool, Crux, and this other thing to kind of measure how you're doing. So it's very clear what you need to do to essentially, be able to stand out and rank well.
What was interesting during that time was, I had a lot of, I don't know, players in the space that were just, brands that were just kind of looking at the competition. And it's like, well, if we just rank better than them, then we don't have to do all these things, right? And site speed was so hard to play with to get a significant increase. I mean, different now, right? With partners like you, that I had a lot of brands just sitting back saying, I just hope my competition doesn't do anything so I don't have to do anything. And we all just going to remain slow together. And I don't. And then we, with COVID and the acceleration of .com, everybody was growing no matter what.
Yeah.
So they're like, well, I guess we're okay. But this next year, I think to 18 months is going to be completely different. There's a lot more focus on what it takes to truly run a best-in-class e-commerce website. Site speed, you're going to see a lot of people really pouring into it because it is such an impactful thing, especially on Google. So.
Yeah, I see that too. And I think it's a natural tendency. You build this thing and you start getting heat for speed. Google starts saying, hey, this doesn't pass. The immediate thing you do is you go look at your competitors and say, hey, look, they're also not passing. I'm not literally the only non-passing person. And so it's like grade
me on a curve. I'm
Yeah,
still at the
exactly.
top.
It's great. Everyone's graded on a curve,
Yeah.
and as this becomes, it's not straightforward to do, which is why people don't just flip a switch and say, "Hey, I'll just make it a priority for this quarter, and we'll be done with it." Some stuff is low-hanging fruit, but honestly, a lot of that, everyone has a CDN. Um, uh, Many companies run various tests where they at least make sure their homepage is, the front door is as fast as possible. But as we all know, that alone isn't, the harder parts are product pages and catalog pages. Even things like checkout can be accelerated, especially if they're, that's where you have a lot of the security things. And if you're having to route far away for that user before blocking and doing other things, that'll slow down the checkout piece of it. So, once people started to say, hey, I need to actually handle this. And so the beauty of the way Google looked at it is they didn't just go say, hit the homepage of a customer and an e-commerce company and say, okay, what's your speed there? They said, what are real users? So they have all this data within Chrome. It's all been, anonymized. So it's not tied to individuals, but it is tied to websites. And so they gathered all that data from Chrome and said, hey, across your entire experience, what are real users seeing? And let's look, and then you can chop and slice it up by geography, by connection type. Is it a kind of slow mobile connection or a fast mobile connection? And you can slice it in every way and you can get this histogram. You don't just get a average. You can kind of see that, hey, and what they do is they said, hey, we're going to really penalize you for that bottom 25th percentile, that slowest piece, so that you guys are focused not just on your averages and then calling it a day, but actually on, the 75th percentile of performance. And that's, those are all the things that they did to make it clear, hey, this is how we're going to rank you. So you better pay attention. So it started to take hold, and what people found was pretty difficult. Is not straightforward to do this sort of thing. If you look at vendors, they, like I say, part of, why are we here? Why did we come to be? One of the reasons, security was a huge element of this. We found it was nearly integrated into the workflows, and problems like performance. As it was kind of this separate standalone tool. That was a big thing. But another big thing was that, hey, why does everybody buy a web CDN? And why do most websites fail Google's speed? And doesn't that seems like a contradiction? The market spends at least $4 to $5 billion on website CDN platforms and technology a year, and yet most companies don't pass. And then you go talk to your vendors, that say, okay, we pay you all this money for caching, and you talk about this thing called the edge, and yet I fail these things. And they say, look, we do everything we can. Your application is slow. That's sort of back on you. And in fact, if you're on a call with us and you start talking about your application, you didn't pay for those hours for us to go debug your application. That's your problem. And we're not experts in your application. And by the way, we're not on the clock for this type of thing. Ask us if a caching rule is kind of misconfigured. We can answer that. And so, the problem is it's your application. You put in all these third-party tools and trackers. And, we felt like, hey, that's sort of somehow and creatively, these vendors were able to sidestep this idea that you paid us originally for reliability and speed. That's why you hired a CDN, and now you're suddenly saying that's not our problem. It felt like an opportunity, and it felt like it was at some level unfair. Some companies, these top brands spend millions of dollars, some of them tens of millions of dollars on their CDN, and to then say, well, performance is not our problem, I think is an issue. So we came in with a very different approach, and we said, hey, performance is our problem. And it should be our problem. We'll give you all the tooling. We'll also give you a team if you need it and require it to help you really solve all these problems, no matter where they may lie. And I think that was something that I think changed the game. We see a lot of this market now saying, hey, I see Edgio's really tapped into something that we were sort of, trying to wash our hands clean of, which is, hey, CDN should make your site fast. I mean, it sounds simple when you say it. And so performance became basically something that I think we've really pushed on the market. I now see billboards from competitors out in San Francisco talking about site speed again. And that's something that, they kind of, again, for years, washed their hands clean of. They said, hey, we're like an AWS. We give you all the tooling. You can do whatever you want, And if you use the tooling incorrectly, well, don't blame the tools, blame the mechanic, right? And that's, I think that's a bit unfair and honestly uncompetitive. And we're showing that you can be a lot more competitive if you solve that problem.
So what is if I'm listening in, to this episode, what is that takeaway? Because there's going to be a lot of people that listen, and I would say probably 98% of the people who listen are going to say, I identify with that. right now, and it is not something I've worked on or yeah, it's been top of mind for me, but it's not been at the forefront. But this year it is, and like, what is the first step? Are they going back and just doing analysis on site speed, where they show up with Google? Are they having a conversation with the CDN? Are they like, how do you tell people to get started? Because then there's a lot of people that need to find a partner like you, right? Because they can't do this on their own. What's like step one, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I would say I'll assume that you've looked at Google, just to throw it out to the kind of listeners here. Core Web Vitals is the thing to Google to just see, run the test, look where you stand. There's a database called, it's such an odd name. It's Google, it's called Crux, CRUX. I don't know what it stands for. But basically you can look up what Google sees your real performance to be, and you can look up your competitors as well. So I would start there. And regardless of where your competitors are, just know, as Aaron, you've been saying, this is going to become something you're going to have to kind of take care of regardless. So this is more to just set and get an understanding of where things stand and look at the more detailed view on these things. Then the first thing I would do is I would challenge you definitely have a vendor that may not have ever talked to you about website performance and Google Crux and but you hire them for that. If you really think about it, go to them, say, what do I do? What do I need to fix? And they should be doing a free POC type of thing. I think we are starting to set the standard for doing that sort of thing that shows that, hey, this is what you could have. And they may not do it on the entire experience, but they should absolutely do it on the important pieces. So if you're in e-commerce business, it's not just about the homepage. They should do it for, call it, product listing pages or category, catalog style pages. Should do it for product pages.
Now, is this their agency? Is this Edgio? Who does this evaluation?
Yeah, I would go to the CDN.
Yeah.
So, if you use Edgio, absolutely go to us. And our first response is going to be, great, let's do a POC. Let's bring our experts in and let's show you what's possible. If we haven't already proactively gone to our customers with that. But I would go to whoever that CDN is and really say that that's the case, right? And what you're going to want to watch out for is saying, hey, look, the latency from our Edge Pop in North Carolina to your customers there is 10 milliseconds. And the fact that you take 2 seconds to load, all that, the difference between 10 milliseconds and 2 seconds, hey, that's all on you and your application and issues like that. I would push back on that. You should absolutely push back on that because, at the end of the day, they're hired to actually make the experience faster. And yes, there's certain things on your application you can and should fix. They should tell you exactly what that is. They should deep dive and figure that out for you. They should have tooling that actually solves some of those problems for you, as opposed to saying, hey, it's all just a big set of engineering tasks that you already don't have the time to execute on. And so that would be the first thing I'd say is, go push on the CDN that you work with and ask to solve the entire problem, not necessarily just what is that latency? They call it time to first byte. Your customers don't see a time to first byte. They click a button and then something shows up in front of them. The measure of that is called largest contentful paint. It's one of the metrics Google uses to rank your website. So Google, I'll give them credit. Instead of putting vanity metrics together, things that you can easily game. I don't know if you guys, Aaron, if you remember, there used to be a time when people said they cared about site speed. What you end up seeing is these spinners that said loading. Mm-hmm. Your page will be loading, and you'll see sometimes it was fancy. If it was an airline, it'd be a little plane flying. If it was e-commerce, you'd see a little shopping bag filling up or something. The reason that happened is because there used to be a definition of page load time, which could be easily tricked by sticking one of those spinners and loading pages up in front. And that's not, largest contentful paint is intelligent. It says, what is that end state supposed to look like? And what is that point at which, 80% of it is essentially there? And then it works backwards and gives you credit for that 80% time. That's very hard to trick. A spinner is not the end state. So you end up, not tricking it with a spinner. So so time to first byte is something CDNs will constantly say, hey, we're much faster on time to first byte. That was a great argument 10 years ago, but it's not what your shopper sees. That is just one fraction. Maybe it's 1% of the time it takes for a page to actually render in front of a user where it feels like, hey, I can now scroll, I can interact with it. So largest contentful paint is probably the hardest thing to get to be, a good number, an attractive number, but it also can't be gamed. And so I would go put that metric in front of your CDN partner. And I'd really start with them. You may have an agency And that agency is going to want to say, hey, great, let's go dive in. Let me do a little POC with you, and then let's go spend a ton of time and billable hours to go do anything you want on the performance front, right? And they view that as an opportunity to upsell, but you're already paying a CDN. And it was theoretically with the goal of being fast. Why not get value and leverage for what you already paid? And that's what, we say. We don't come in and say, hey, go, by virtue of buying this in one of our bundles, it gives you security and this kind of breakneck, instantaneous performance. It also gives you kind of site speed, team velocity acceleration tools. So discover bugs faster, debugging tools, all that sort of thing. We give it to you in a bundle, so you don't have to make these trade-offs. But I won't spend a lot of time on that element of it. So that's where I'd start. I'd really go to the CDN and go to them with a challenge and say, hey, I think I just need this thing to paint fast. I don't need any fancy terms like time to first byte. How do you get me there? And then it'll go many places. Obviously encourage you to go to kind of some of the, if you were to ask that question of us, for example, Edgio, we would certainly come back with POCs and show you exactly what the art of the possible is in terms of speed. And as I was alluding to before, a blink of an eye is about 300 milliseconds. So if you can get underneath that, so 300 milliseconds is 30% of 1 second. So if you can kind of get something to load in and about that time, you've effectively, it appears instantaneous to the shopper. And you can't get better than that. And we found that brands that are able to go from above average. So on mobile, above average would be 1.5 seconds. But if you're able to get them to that instantaneous speed, you see as big wins as from going from average to above average, because you really got people actually experiencing some level of joy. And we've heard those terms. And so what does that mean? You'll have a company that's already tuned its experience. You'll run a split test. You'll bring them to instantaneous. I'll, bring up a brand, Tapestry, which owns Coach, Kate Spade, Stuart Weitzman, and all those brands. They had already optimized for speed in many ways, but when they were able to get to this kind of instantaneous page load time, they saw double-digit percentage growth to revenue per user and conversion rate, and ultimately online revenue, in a split-tested way. So this wasn't some before and after. They ran the old and new simultaneously, and they were able to measure, in the kind of teens, improvement to revenue as a result of that. This is after having had so many wins on performance and conversion rate through all the sophisticated performance and A/B testing stuff they had done, just by going to kind of that instantaneous level. Now, we found more immature brands are able to get into, we've had customers that see 40% revenue gains. So imagine that, you come in, you do all this stuff over the years to optimize for revenue, and then you add all these tools actually to help you do that. And those tools are, many of them are valuable, but it's the bloat of all those tools that at the end of the day come in and they've progressively been, undoing things. I'd say the biggest tool that is both a winner and a loser is these A/B testing tools. You run all these tests, and this whole industry, you go ask people who are sophisticated A/B testers, and you say, hey, what's the usual kind of test result you get out? It's usually inconclusive. And then these like UX people and business folks are scratching their heads like, clearly this thing is better. And the anecdotes that, I changed the UI in a way that's far more intuitive. My shoppers were all saying it's better, and yet the revenue didn't go up. Often what's happening is that the user experience is better, the performance is worse, because most of these A/B testing tools, they come in, and what they do is they sort of hijack the browser, and then they swap in that new experience there. And so you add a second or two of latency just to do that sort of thing. And so then you go look at your Google Analytics, and you look at A and B, and it's not statistically significant a win. And yet people are telling you, hey, this UX is so much better. What's lost in that is the performance piece, which is essentially a tax on every one of these A/B tests. So, if you have a platform like ours that runs at the edge, you can run all the A/B tests you want with zero impact to performance. So, making sure that works well, making sure security doesn't impact performance, which is a requirement. These are all things that sort of are at that next level of performance that we found. If you're just solely dedicated on performance, you're not going to solve problems around security, around A/B testing. If you're only focused on A/B testing, you're not going to solve that, problems on performance. If you're only focused on security, you're saying, hey, performance is something that's more about your application, go work with your engineers to fix it. So, we found that you had to really solve multiple problems simultaneously, or ultimately you're putting your customer in a really awkward position. Do you want a secure experience or a fast one? Or do you want both? But do you want to ship half the number of features per month? Because you're only focused on those two things and not, the usual cadence of things you need to put out there to be competitive. And we found that was just a triangle that was untenable. And we looked at the market and everyone was focused on one or at best two things in that, in that triangle and never really trying to solve all three. And I think that that's the kind of heart of what, we've been seeing with customers where they're able to get all three. And then there's kind of no looking back. And so, yeah, you asked a simple question just about where to start. I would start with your CDN vendor and put the problem to them and see what they come back with.
No, awesome. And I couldn't agree more. And you guys are filling this very interesting space where we need people to look at it from a different view, right? From a different standpoint about what their role is. Because the other thing that's happening is there's a massive consolidation of service providers. They want, one person to go after, or they want one partner to praise, whichever way it is. And when you can have somebody that's looking at all of those, it makes overall the crazy, hectic life of somebody in e-commerce right now, especially on the direct consumer side, where they're saying, hey, we just grown for 3 years straight. Are we going to grow this year too? Because everybody says we're not. They got to be able to step up and say, yeah, and here's why. And here's the 5 different things that I'm working on. And I think this website speed, just because it's been coming up so much, is going to be at the top for a lot of people over the next 18 months. I mean, I've been picking your brain for a while. Like, any questions for me? I always like to throw it back over there.
Yeah, I'm really curious. Do you, in your role, you talk to so many leaders in digital commerce, digital experiences. Where's the security converse? Do those individuals think about security for these experiences, or are they typically leaning on people you don't tend to talk to? I don't know, CISOs.
So I would say 100% of the people should, but 10% of the people are. And a lot of that is because, when COVID hit, there were probably 1,500 people in the US, we'll say, that really knew e-commerce or had a passion for it and were just crushing it. There are some new people that were just jumping in, but then COVID hits and we need 8 to 10,000, and you can't train those people overnight. And now it's moving faster than it's ever moved before. And so it's not out of like negligence. It's just out of the fact that there's so many things going on. They're not even concerned right now with security. They just need the website speed. And they think, after I've got that solved, if I have these major security issues, I'm going to go after it. Or you've got this whole separate group of security people saying, you can't do it, hold back. And now they're butting heads with the e-com people because they need performance and site speed because of everything that you mentioned: increased conversion, double-digit revenue growth, all of these things to justify their existence. And so the security thing is almost like, I'm going to deal with that later if I even talk about it or know about it before it's flagged. But
yeah, so they're saying sort of, I'll worry about it when someone internally tells me it's a problem.
Yeah.
And only then.
And then 80% just don't even think about it. They just don't. And it's nothing negligent. It's just they've been asked to learn so much so fast.
Yeah.
I mean, think about trying to grapple what security looks like for e-commerce while you're also trying to learn digital marketing. You're trying to evaluate, 18 different tools to add in, agencies, right? At the same time, there's an Amazon team. You've got retail media blowing up. You've got all these questions to answer, and your team just shrunk last year.
Yeah.
It's just tough. And so what they need is, and what I love about what you guys are doing, and one of the reasons I wanted to have this podcast is like, you bring along, like, hey, I've got this CDN here, we're going to sell it to you, and hopefully it works. It's, hey, let's look at the whole picture and let's see how we solve it. And let's go down this path together, because we want you to be secure and we want you to have high performance and we want you to be fast, and we can give those all to you, but let's walk down that path together. And I'm going to flag things that you never thought about. And you might want to flag things that I never thought about. I would say it's probably 20-1, right? Where you're flagging things they never thought about. Everybody needs a partner in this space, and they're eager to learn. They want to do it right. It's not because they don't care about security. It hasn't been, something that's been at the forefront of what they've been trying to do. I put that
on us vendors too. I mean, if customers aren't paying attention to something, that's not on them at all. I mean, to your point, there's so much responsibility that's fallen on them with shrinking budgets, as, Amazon eats all the margin in e-com, and other these big giants do that. It makes it harder and harder to be your own brand. And
Your team's shrunk. Now you're doing twice as much as you were doing, and you were doing twice as much last year as you were the year before.
Brand, all that targeting that you had that was possible before the iOS changes and everything else. I mean, that went away as well. So I mean, so then the ROI on online spend has gotten so much harder, on
Yeah.
performance marketing because of all the changes to tracking and personalization, both there, Chrome, everywhere else. So I mean, it's a
And
mountain of so I view this as sort of falling on us in a sense, meaning, when talking about security to e-commerce business leaders who really just care about growth and margin, but especially growth, so there's actually entire categories of security software that was actually primarily initially built for e-commerce. Bot management, bot protection, in many ways started with e-commerce. And it started with things like credit card fraud, things like gift card and loyalty fraud, things like scraping of data and content, to feed into these aggregators who essentially make it easy for people to make you look like more of a commodity by putting your product right alongside other things. Scalping, as I spoke to a couple times, whether it's tickets or it's a sneaker drop or whether it's just a great sale on something. These were all things where people realized, hey, a firewall was not enough. We
Mhm.
need a thing that actually looks for bots that are more sophisticated, that are able to, look like real and legitimate users. And as those got more and more sophisticated, the vendors like us had to get more and more sophisticated about detecting those sorts of things. And that's all of those things I mentioned are all tangible revenue loss. And I'd say so then the problem is really on us as vendors as well to say, hey, when having that conversation with a business leader on the e-commerce side, turn it from a thing of, hey, I haven't thought about it or care about it to one around revenue loss. All those elements of whether you're having gift card fraud, point fraud, credit card fraud, scalping, scraping, they're all resulting in small or even big ways in terms of revenue loss. Another huge thing that we find the more ops focused heads of business, hey, why did I have an outage when I had that sale? The same thing is starting to happen with increasing frequency on DDoS attacks. So you're getting DDoS for whatever reason. Nowadays you can go spend $20 on the dark web, pick a site that sort of, gave you bad customer experience and send a DDoS attack at them just to get, a form of revenge. There's teenagers who do that. Just say, hey, look, don't mess with me type of thing. Right. And then, then they take credit for it, anonymously and that type of thing. That sort of thing happens as well, where again, you're experience huge revenue loss for those, hour or two that you're having to handle these types of issues. And, because you happen to trigger somebody that was out there that knows how to do this sort of thing, or they don't even know how to do it themselves. They just know how to pay some money. So those are types of things that all come back to revenue. Now, on top of that, of course, there's PCI compliance and things like that, which are pushing people. A WAF is kind of a requirement for gaining PCI. Now there's something called a client-side WAF. So in your browser, people are using all sorts of third-party open source web, plugins and tools, to enhance the experience on an e-commerce website or any website. Some of those tools are compromised. And so what you need to make sure is that it's not grabbing your customer's data and firing it off to a special server, to exfiltrate credit card information or data. And so to protect against that, there's tooling, that us and others have that essentially say, hey, we're going to monitor the behavior of the browser, not just the requests to the server, but what's going on in the browser. And is data being exfiltrated? Are you making requests to domains other than your own domain and Google Analytics and ones your certain advertising partners? Who else is the code kind of making requests to? And can you go block that just as much as you can block things that are hitting you directly? So that's an example of kind of more of a PCI type of thing, less so about revenue. But I think it's on us to show and talk about how much security actually impacts revenue. And those two worlds aren't really connected because, they got different departments focused on these types of things.
And I think you said it is everybody right now is looking for a partner that's going to help them through this journey as a whole. And those, the service providers that are out there that can come alongside them and think more than just revenue and think more beyond, hey, I want to add on 20 more clients so I hit a different revenue threshold so I can get acquired. If they can just be that just all in partner on helping for growth, they're going to destroy it. That's what brands are looking for. And people are willing to pay more for it. That's been shown over and over again. I mean, all I do is talk to brands about new strategies, tech partners. And I have that conversation all the time. Hey, why'd you go with these guys over these guys? They seem to be doing the same thing. They're a partner. They pour time, effort, and they've been along the way. I'll pay more every month because they keep me abreast of the new things that are coming up. And so, I mean, you guys land in that space, and we kind of get into time here. I think we'll probably have to have another one of these at some point in time, maybe a few months down the road, because this has been fun. And I think there's a ton more stuff we could dive into. But, Ajay, thanks so much. You and the team at Edgio, you're great. Really appreciate you and all that you guys pour into the network. But with that, we got to wrap up this episode of the Digital Deep Dive. Thanks again, Ajay. It was so much fun.
Thank you, Aaron. All right. Take a lot of fun.